On this episode of the Visionary Experience, we will have Mr. Antoine Thompson. He is currently the National Executive Director for the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, which is NAREB. He is a former New York State Senator. He is a tireless advocate for Black home ownership, and he fights every single day to help close the wealth gap that exists in this country. This is going to be a fantastic conversation.
Imperial and paradox reporting for duty. Yes. Yeah, we alive on arrival. It's so vital, giving tribute to the vision of those this life stifled. To win against the system like Christ's disciples die.
Welcome to the Visionary Experience. Today, we have a very special guest. We have Mr. Antoine Thompson, the National Executive Director for NAREB, which is the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. We are going to be discussing a variety of topics, specifically talking about African-American home ownership, the economy, politics, and just so many relevant and in-depth topics today. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. Welcome to the Visionary Experience, Antoine. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I hope you're doing well. I'm glad to be here. What a privilege and an honor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So basically what I like to do with my guests, I like to essentially dive right in so that we can get to the meat. You know, we kind of bite through the bread and we get right to the meat of the sandwich. All right. So, all right. So, you know, for those in the Visionary Experience audience who may or may not know much about you, please share a little bit about where you're from.
Yes. Well, again, thank you for having me on. I am originally from Buffalo, New York, upstate New York, right stone's throw from Niagara Falls, but I've been in the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area, affectionately known as DMV, for just over 5 years, and grew up in the great state of New York and cut my teeth on local, state, and national politics, and now at the National Association of Real Estate Brokers.
All right, fantastic. And so you just mentioned, the politics part. So I know that you've held public office in New York. Can you just briefly share about your journey? What led you into politics?
Yes. So a very interesting story. When I was a young kid, I wanted to run for president of the United States. And then I wanted to be some of this, some of that. And then when I got into college, a lot of twists and turns, and got very involved as a student athlete, and then also as a student leader. And so upon leaving college, interesting, I don't tell the story much, but I actually lived for about 2 months in Atlanta and actually interviewed with Congressman John Lewis.
All right.
And I was a finalist for a job, and then he said he had to take one of his local folks. That's kind of how politics goes. And then I wind up saying, you know what, went to Million Man March, and then got inspired and went home to Buffalo, because I hadn't been there for since leaving college, and got involved with local politics and worked for the city council, common council for Buffalo for 2 years. And I ran an economic development agency for 3 years, helping minority and women businesses get public and private sector contracts. And then I went right in, and at the same time, I was working on a lot of political campaigns. And then I managed a campaign for the current mayor of Buffalo. He had got elected to the state senate. And when he got to the state senate, I went to the city council. I was on that for 5 years, and then helped him become mayor. And then I took over his state senate seat, and then I was in the state senate for 4 years, and then I worked for the city for a couple of years, and then I came to Washington, and so that's been the journey.
Amazing. And so through that political journey with the great state of New York, and I say the great state because I went to school in upstate New York myself, to undergrad, went to Syracuse. So go upstate New York, 81 North. Took that trip many times, many times. So, kind of intra and post politics, what eventually led you to NAREB?
Yeah. So, in the early 2000s, I had considered a run for Congress, and I did not do what I wanted, running for state senate, and I won. So I've always had this thing about, giving DC a chance. And a lot of people, when they leave public office, they either go in government relations or community affairs or become a lobbyist or something like that. And so I had, in 2014, I said, a lot is changing in politics. If I don't try this DC thing now, I don't know when I'm ever going to have this opportunity to do it. So I had thought about looking at some jobs in the DC area and started applying to a ton of jobs. I got a few offers for jobs, and then there was this job. I was in real estate for a few years. They were looking for someone in advocacy. I just finished a job doing executive director for the Buffalo Workforce Development Agency, and it all lined up. This job didn't pay as much as the other ones, but I felt like I can come in here and make a difference and fight for Black people. Something I've been doing all my life, So it gave me an opportunity to not be a lobbyist, but do advocacy work, and then also to advance an issue that I have been involved with for many years. I've been on housing boards. I've been on Community Action Program Board of Directors. I've championed diversity and inclusion at the local and state law, authoring laws, helping many people with development projects. So it was like a natural fit. I didn't know it was going to be this much work, but it was good though.
No, amazing. So you've mentioned NAREB. You're at NAREB. You're the National Executive Director. You're, of course, extremely active with them, extremely vocal, extremely visible. So for those in the audience who are not familiar with NAREB, can you share a little bit about NAREB? What's the mission of the organization?
Yes, definitely. So the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, NAREB or NAREB, was founded in 1947 during the height of Jim Crow and discrimination in the country. When African Americans were coming back home from World War II, they had this program that many of your listeners heard about called VA mortgages and FHA loans. Unfortunately, African Americans were shut out of those programs when the association was founded in 1947. And so the association grew out of the Negro Business League, which is now the National Business League, which was founded by Booker T. Washington. And so in 1947, some men and women got together in Tampa, Florida, and said, we need to start our own real estate association, because at that point, the National Association of Realtors did not allow African Americans to be part of their association. So we had to create our own. And so since 1947, we have been championing democracy in housing and diversity and inclusion in the industry, so that African Americans get more opportunities, not only as homeowners, but also as professionals in the real estate industry in its various careers. So we do a lot around access to credit, fair lending, diversity and inclusion in the real estate industry. There are less than 5% of the people in the real estate industry are African American, even though we represent more than 11% of the country. So we have a lot of work to do to move the needle. And we do a lot with trying to advance the rate of Black home ownership, trying to create more African Americans in the lending, real estate, et cetera, related careers. So there's a lot of things that we're involved in. But our primary thing is closing the home ownership gap in the country, because right now, according to the U.S. Census, it is 76% home ownership rate for white Americans compared to a 47% rate of home ownership for Black Americans. So we have a lot to do to close that gap.
Absolutely. And so keeping on that theme, so right now in, the middle or toward the end of 2020, what are some of the areas of strength that you see, for NAREB especially with the socio-political and economic climate that's been growing and brewing throughout the year? What are some areas of strength?
So I think that, the association has been really doubling down on advocacy around building Black wealth through home ownership. There is a growing awareness, not where it needs to be, but there is a growing awareness among white society and others that if we're going to close the racial wealth gap, it can't be done solely through getting people jobs. People must own land. We must break down the barriers to home ownership. And then if unfortunately, if some people are not successful in home ownership, we need to make sure that we come up with ways to keep those properties in the hands of African Americans and not into outside investors and speculators. So it's been a long journey, but I think because of George Floyd, we've gotten a lot of attention and outreach to us from real estate firms, non-real estate firms, corporations, but we still have a ways to go in terms of that urgency to address the issue of the racial wealth gap. So one of the things, though, that we're really excited about is that this year, all of the Democratic candidates running for president in the primary, most of them talked about plans to increase the rate of Black home ownership. So that's a positive sign. And the rate has been steadily increasing since last year, but we still have a long way to go. Not only just to increase the rate, but we also must close the gap because both are important. We don't want to see the rate go up, but the gap stays wide, or the gap closes, but the rate goes down. We got to walk and chew bubblegum. So I think as this current Congress in Washington comes to a close, we've been able to get a few things on the agenda. We need to do more, but some of the things we've been able to fight for example, for some of your listeners, there was an effort by the feds to charge additional points on the refinancing of mortgages. We joined a coalition of industry groups to push back on that, to delay the implementation of increased fees on refinancing of residential mortgages. We were able to get Congressman Gregory Meeks and Congressman Al Green from the House of Representatives, and also Senators Doug Jones and Senator Cory Gardner, each of them to introduce the American Dream Down Payment Act, which will help people save for college the same way, save for a home the same way you can for college. It kind of mirrors the 529 program. We think that program will help people on their way to becoming a homeowner, because for African Americans, we often don't have enough resources to save for a home at the rate to which whites do, because many of them are second, third, fourth generation homeowners. So we're often at that disadvantage when it comes to saving for a down payment. The other thing is the association is fighting aggressively for the creation of an African American homeownership program in the country, which is one currently exists for Native Americans, Alaskans, and Hawaiians. It's also known as HUD Section 184, the Native American Homeownership Program that was expanded to include other groups. We need a similar program for Black people based on historic discrimination. This would be a restorative policy to address some of the issues that dealt with redlining and discrimination in the mortgage industry for decades. So those are just a snapshot of some of the things that we see happening at the federal level that we're cautiously optimistic about. And we're also in the process of launching a real estate scholarship program We'll provide some scholarships for people going into the real estate industry, and just a number of other things as well.
Okay, well, I'm skipping down on a few questions because you brought up a couple of really important things. So let's start with the last thing that you just said. So you had mentioned HUD Section 184, right? Correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm, okay. Yes.
So, being in politics, having so much experience, and also within the housing sector, also within the advocacy sector, for many decades in this country, there's been the overarching sentiment that with Democrats, they are more apt to give handouts to African Americans and Blacks. What would be your answer to the question who would say, no, HUD Section 184 is just another handout?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we put in the context of the United States of America, there's a book that called The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, where he does an excellent job of chronicling well over 100 years the various policies that were created by the federal government to help white Americans own land and accumulate wealth, with very few of those opportunities being extended to African Americans. And when they were extended to African Americans, in various ways, with the support either directly or indirectly of the federal government, those lands were taken from African Americans. So we look at from the Homestead Act that allowed whites to get hundreds of acres of land in the West that was rarely afforded to African Americans, all the way through the 30s, 40s, 50s to the early 60s, mm-hmm. where whites were able to get 30-year mortgages, some with no money down. White veterans got VA loans with no money down. Black veterans for over 30 years could not. And so it's not a handout, it's a hand up. It's a restorative based on historic discrimination that shut out African Americans to wealth building opportunities through owning land. The government they built the suburbs. There are a number of situations where that was made available. So as we came back from World War II, it was called the Urbanization of America. Encourage your listeners to read the book Crabgrass Frontier, which is about the suburbanization of America and how whites were given 30-year mortgages, no money down, or discount rated mortgages to move to the suburbs. And some of these places, like Levittown, New Jersey, Black people couldn't even move out there, and they were able to create intergenerational wealth with the assistance of the government. Those type of opportunities, by and large, were not afforded to Black people and still are not. And so we're always in this situation of providing economic stimulation for white society versus African Americans being viewed as, are they responsible homeowners, or is this a handout? When it's white society, it's assistance and economic stimulation, economic incentives, versus African Americans is, are they responsible? Are they competent? Or why are we giving them a handout? So that's a constant debate, and it's all about who's telling the story.
Well, I really appreciate that, because it's not only about the semantics, but it's about the meaning behind the words, right? It's like what's the message behind what you're trying to share. And you said a word that really resonates with me, and it's restorative. And definitely I've mentioned several times on my podcast, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. So I'm a big proponent of the book, and you and I actually were on a Facebook Live with Stephanie DeBerry a couple of months ago, right? And yeah, we talked a little bit about this, and I really look at the culture of African Americans and how over a matter of decades, that culture has become, so urbanized, but that was by design, right? Not by our design, right? But by a systematic design, because we were shut out of the suburbs, systematically not being able to, like you said, veterans not being able to use
they
the
had
GI
restrictive
Bills,
covenants. I mean,
absolutely.
The fact of the matter is that this didn't happen by accident. You had the federal government that provided free land, state government's land. They had racially restrictive covenants. Black people can only go in some of these communities to do day work or serve as maids and butlers, and they had to be out of some of these communities by sundown. And then you had an entire banking system and mortgage system that was stood up by Franklin Delano Roosevelt coming out of the Great Depression that made it possible for many white Americans to become homeowners at the expense, at the exclusion of Black Americans. And that went on for well over 30 years. That their homeownership rate was able to accelerate, but Black people had to get into land contracts. We had to try to figure out, get funding, financing by any means necessary. And it carries on to this day, meaning that even to this day, if you're a Black person, you live in a low income area, it's hard to get a mortgage. It's hard to get a rehab loan to fix up your home. People are denied for rehabilitation loans in some communities almost at the same rate, and sometimes even higher, as it is to get a first-time mortgage. So think about it. You've been in your house 10 years, roof collapses, or you need some repairs, and it's still hard to get even a rehab loan in some neighborhoods for Black people.
No, I agree. And working in the mortgage industry, in particular, talking about insurance, I work with different homeowners insurance providers, and I know for sure that they have higher rates for Prince George's County, Maryland, Baltimore, Maryland, certain, more urbanized areas. And I'm like, why? And with insurance, it's all a matter of risk. And that's what you're talking about. Unfortunately, African Americans have always been viewed as a higher risk for whatever it may be, a higher risk of default, a higher risk of not doing as well enough, or on the flip side, a higher risk of, doing something illegal. Right. So you have the sins of commission and omission. It's like you can't necessarily win. But it leads me to another point. So historically, as you know very well, and to this day, there are other minority communities that generally, I'm not going to say overall, but generally have successfully recycled money within their own community. Right. You look at the Jewish community, the East Asian community. They've been, to their credit, very, very successful in being able to recycle and keep money within a certain ecosystem and environment. What are your thoughts with regards to the billions upon billions of dollars of buying power that African Americans have? How can we also take a look at that? Not necessarily be so exclusive, but copy that model so that we can continue to bolster and buoy the minority community financially.
Yeah. So I would say you're absolutely correct. Some of that is internal, some of that has been external. And I think that we have to give the listening audience a true picture of how we got there.
Okay.
So it is not by accident that African Americans have a very strong consumer trend, but we are also very entrepreneurial. It is not, since America's founding, there have been successful Black entrepreneurs, successful Black inventors as well, hotel owners, restaurant owners, you name it. But what we also have to remember as well, that since the founding of America, there has been continuous efforts to destroy and limit the growth and success of Black institutions as well. Whether you look at the Freedmen's Bank, whether you look at black farmers whose land were burned out, people who were chased out of the South, right? People who own businesses in the North whose businesses were burned down and they couldn't go to court, had no legs to stand on. And so you have white businesses, and institutions that have been around for a couple hundred years, third, fourth, fifth generation businesses that have been able to expand, and family members able to leverage that to other institutions and other corporate enterprises. Unfortunately, we've not been able to do that at the rate at which we should have, because our experience in America has been fundamentally different from any other group.
Agreed.
While some groups have received some adverse treatment, the fact of the matter is the hatred for black people has always been and continues to be the worst. And on top of that, the feeling that they need to do something different, that they need to address the treatment of black people, that sort of sentiment really runs out the window when it comes to African Americans. And whether you look at reparations or civil rights or human rights, those things there's always some reason why black people need to just go along and forget about not only what's happened in the past, but what happens in the present. I will also say that there is some responsibility on our side as well. We know that there's a black tax on our people, whether it's when buying a home, buying a car, buying life insurance, buying food. There has been consistently efforts to make it more expensive for us to do things. So it's imperative that we work more collectively, as Dr. Malana Karenga, who is the founder of Kwanzaa, would say. We've got to do more around cooperative work and responsibility and cooperative economics. And I think that as elected officials, as community leaders, as faith leaders, we need to spend more of our energy on homeownership and black business development. And unfortunately, too much of our effort is on the symptoms and not on the solutions, right? And so the lack of home ownership and lack of business ownership and lack of capital, those three things drive a lot of these other areas. And unfortunately, I don't think as a community that we put enough focus on those things. Obtaining land, growing businesses, and growing lending and financial institutions. And those can all change if we all speak it into existence. We need to change public policies. We need to change regulatory policies, but we also need to change our mindset as well as a community.
No, I appreciate that. And so what are some of the ways that NAREB specifically is helping to, provide some of those solutions?
So, one of the biggest things that we are doing is promoting land ownership. So in 2015, we stood up a program called the 2 Million New Black Homeowner Program in 5 years. And in that, since 2015, 1 million black people have become homeowners. And so that's helped with move the needle. But we need to see that number dramatically increase. We need to see it, and then at the same time, we need to reduce the number of people who are losing their homes. Because every time a black person becomes a homeowner, or a white person, or any other person, anywhere from 10 to 15 jobs and businesses are impacted by one real estate transaction. So you're not just buying a house, you're putting people to work, you're impacting everything from the landscaper to the builder, to the moving company, to the furniture store, to the locksmith, to the person that, is putting new carpet in that place, new hardware stores, to the faucets. So every real estate deal impacts the economy. That's why real estate represents 20% of the gross national domestic product for the United States. 20%. Unfortunately, because our homeownership rate is so low, the wealth gap in the country is over $100,000 between whites and blacks. In home ownership and land ownership is part of it. So we do a lot of advocacy, we do a lot of outreach, we do a lot of awareness, and we are trying to partner with anyone that would like to join in this cause to increase the rate of black home ownership, black real estate development, more black lenders, brokers, insurance agents, property managers, etc., so that we can not only own land, but then accumulate it and then transfer it, and then make sure all those related careers are more diverse in the real estate industry. Because as I stated earlier, less than 5% of real estate professionals in the United States of America are African American.
Amazing. And so with that, I'm going to go back to something that you had mentioned before, with regards to, different groups. And it is crucial that our listeners, or anyone for that matter, gets a really clear picture. African Americans have a unique historical precedence and cultural precedence in this country, right? And we were, what did Malcolm X say? We didn't land on Plymouth Rock, Plymouth Rock landed on us. Well, but when you think about that, when you think about the term immigrant, right? The term immigrant really means, okay, someone who's come to this country specifically seeking opportunity, asylum, etc., right? But that's not by and large at all the history of African Americans. And what you had mentioned is so true, because there were intentional barriers year after year, decade after decade set up against African Americans so that we would not succeed, right? So that we would only be good for labor, right? To help. See, we're not counted in that GDP that you've mentioned, right? Or when you think about our founding fathers, you think about Thomas Jefferson. Okay, well, great. Well, he owned 600 slaves, or more, right? And he married, was it Sally Hemings or Flemings or something like that? And had multiple kids. And so when you kind of lift up the hood and you look at everything a little bit more carefully, you understand why things are the way that they are today. And so that's why I really appreciate organizations like NAREB and the such, because it's really about taking a look at it for what it is, not so much necessarily making excuses, but saying, but you have to see the clear picture. You have to understand why things are the way that they are. And then once you understand why, then you're able to really make a much more, clear path and strategy, toward addressing it. And so,
you're spot on. The facts are that Native American homeownership is lower than the black folks, right? Then it's the black ownership rate, and then it's the Hispanic ownership rate. Excuse me. And what you also need to remember is that even within those groups, particularly African Americans, Native Americans, African Americans, Latino or Latinx Americans, and Asian Americans, there are subgroups within those groups, and many of those groups, even in the black experience, not all of them have the same story. Some of them are immigrants who came here, who are first or second generation families from Africa, the Caribbean, or Europe, or wherever it may, South America, wherever they may come from, and they come with a different story. They may come, their families may have been refugees or immigrants, when they may have come with a different story in terms of their social economic profiles when they came. And so you're trying. Sometimes we paint a picture and we don't realize that. Well, some people may have come from a family where both parents came to the United States with college degrees, and then they were able to work hard, face discrimination, but at least they were ready for the prime time in terms of having college degrees when they came to the States, which then made it possible for them to move up a little easier. Not to say they didn't experience discrimination and other things, but at least they came with that, that bachelor's degree or that PhD. And those are some of the things that are often overlooked when we talk about this economic stratification that even exists amongst minority populations. It's like comparing immigrants who come from Japan to immigrants who come from Korea or immigrants who come from China compared to immigrants who may come from Pakistan. All these different groups are not the same. It's like comparing Dominicans and Puerto Ricans or El Salvadorians to Cubans. Every minority group has different experiences compared to the third or fourth generation Latino or Latina that grew up in the Bronx. They're going to have a different experience from the one who is coming from Mexico today. Every situation is different, but what the common denominator is, and common factor is that discrimination is still a problem in the United States and America. Absolutely.
And so with that, let me ask you this. That's a big dark cloud that's continued to be over us, right? In previous podcasts, I've talked about different time frames, within this country. The time frame that we're in right now is begging for national and local leadership to help us be a fog light, essentially. Like, we've got to be able to navigate our way through this. Obviously, you're a leader within the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. So what is your outlook with regards to, and I'm not necessarily even talking about the presidential election, but and you can add it if you want to, but what is your outlook for national and local leadership in this country, specifically with what we're going through, be it COVID, be it the Black Lives Matter movement, be it everything that's going on with homeownership, foreclosures, the CARES Act? What's your outlook with regards to now and going into next year?
So first, that's an excellent question, and something that I take seriously, I take personally as well, not just professionally, but personally. And because of my experience at the local and state level, and now being on a national level for over 5 years, at this moment, I feel extremely prepared and extremely hungry for change. And so what I look at right now is that this is a defining moment in the United States of America, and it's a defining moment in the Black experience in the United States as well. And so what I have been pushing every major Black leader in the country about with our team at our association is to make sure that there is a Black wealth building agenda. NAREB was part of Black Wealth 2020, and shout out to Ron Buxby from the U.S. Black Chamber, who was helped start that. And so what we are all working on right now is making sure that day one, on January 20th of 2021, whoever becomes president of the United States, that it is clear what the Black agenda is for housing and home ownership. We are so focused on that, so that, we're not just going to be excited like we were when Obama got elected. We got a Black president and we didn't give him an agenda. We're not just going to be excited that hopefully if there's a Black female vice president, or Trump gets in and decides he wants to be nice to Black people, that we're just happy about it. We are all pushing an agenda, and the Realtors Association, the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, has a very aggressive Black home ownership agenda, and we plan to make sure that going into October, going into November and December, and definitely in January, that whoever the president is on January 20th, that their first 100 days, that they have some specific policies that help address the racial wealth gap through home ownership in the country. That's our primary focus right now, in addition to trying to close that home ownership gap with Black millennials.
Okay, so you're basically saying that, well, I'm going to say it like a statement / question here, because earlier in our conversation, you talked about during the Democratic primaries and debates, how there was a lot of discussion about Black home ownership, right?
Yes, because you got to go from idea to action.
Exactly. So it's fair to say then during any primary or any, sets of debates, they're always going to have certain flavors of the month. They're going to have certain topics that are going to appeal to people. Why? Because they want to get their votes. So obviously there's some legislative action that needs to happen. So, what are some specific things that NAREB can do, or some specific, calls to action or action items that can be done? Because what ends up happening is, and we've all seen it, you have the campaign trail promises versus reality. And so how can we make that different this time around?
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. Well, let's say first things first. So in 2016, there was no talk about Black home ownership at all.
Okay.
Or home ownership. All right. And in fact, during much of the Obama administration, when he ran for re-election, there wasn't a lot of talk about housing. So NAREB has been out here, building the appetite for people to talk about home ownership for the last 5 years, right? We really put last 5 to 7 years, a lot of capital into doing this. And a lot of events have happened. And so now our focus, with the help of so many others from the clergy, the other business organizations, and the civil rights community and others, we've got to make sure that we get this American Dream Down Payment Act done. We got to address the issue of credit underwriting and credit scores. There's been some progress on that. We've got to get rid of the pricing disparity on mortgages based on your zip code and your color. And we've got to make sure that there's an African-American home ownership program. There's also got to be focus on foreclosures that are likely to increase over the next 24 months, and making sure that African-American agents and brokers are part of the disposition process. Because the last 10 years, Black agents and brokers are really cut out of that process to a large degree the last 5 to 7 years. So there's a lot of work to do. And I think, to your point, our focus, along with others, really needs to be several things that we must do, that we got to stay in the face of the White House, the leaders of the House, and the leaders of the Senate and the Congressional Black Caucus, and hold their feet to the fire. We cannot have another situation like what happened with the Paycheck Protection Program, where billions of dollars were put out there and very few of them went to Black people. And we just can't have that foolishness anymore. That's a travesty. Anyone that voted for that, is just terrible that the way that went down at the expense of Black businesses during a time of a crisis. And if we allow people to just say they got to get something done, we'll work it out later, it almost never works to our benefit. So we have to be very vigilant. We have to be aggressive, and we have to demand equity and equality.
No, I mean, you couldn't have said it better. And it's, the mantra of NAREB is democracy in housing. And right now, there's no better way than I know than for us to exercise our democratic right than to vote it in, right? To vote the people in that are going to accurately represent the agenda of Blacks across this country, for sure, for people who have a true connection and empathy and, that ability to see, what, it's not just good for Black people, it's good for the entire country. It's good to raise up an entire new generation of young boys and girls who will have an example in front of them, right? To be able to fundamentally transform this country from the ground up. So I definitely appreciate that. And we're about to end here. Are there any final thoughts, comments, anything that you would like to end off with and share with our audience today?
Yes, a few things. One, the National Association of Real Estate Brokers on the 22nd of September at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we will release our State of Housing in Black America report. Mm-hmm. They can watch our forum. They can go to CBCF, AOC, the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation will release it on their platform. It's free to watch, but you have to register. In addition to that, on October 27th from 1 to 3 p.m., the association will have its national conversation on Black home ownership. You can go to NAREB.com for more information. And we want everyone to know that Black home ownership matters. We must fight to preserve the American dream and ensure that it is expanded to include every African American that desires to be a homeowner and landowner. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And on that, we're going to end off. Thank you so much, Antoine, for an amazing, provocative, connecting, deep conversation. I look forward to us doing this again at some point in the future.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening to this episode of The Visionary Experience. We will see you again soon. Hey, family. What an amazing conversation today. I look forward to seeing you again soon. And as always, to God be the glory.